Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Villa fans, and welcome to the crossover with Wolves. From the Daily Wolves podcast, I am joined by Will Meddens. How are you, Will?
Yeah, I'm all good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, mate, very well. So, can you give us a short synopsis on Wolves' start to the season? How have things been for you?
It's not been a great start, to be honest with you. I mean, I was speaking with Chris from Daily Wolves as well, and we were looking at our fixtures to come for the rest of September, obviously Villa included, and it's not looking good. We've got 1 point so far, and we're sort of predicting from this month that we'll get 3, maybe 4 somehow. I don't know who against, because we've got obviously you guys, Villa, and Liverpool afterwards, and it's looking a lot like it could be 1 point from a possible 12, which it doesn't make for pretty reading.
No, absolutely not. So kind of looking at your squad on paper, there's some really talented players in there. You know, Cunha and a few others. Can you maybe put your finger on why you haven't had such a good start to the season?
I think originally O'Neill was struggling with his system in terms of he wanted to make this switch to a back four, which in theory is lovely, but what we soon realised was we don't have the players for a back four, or we do, but he wasn't necessarily selecting them correctly. I'd say we've just come off the back of a narrow defeat against Newcastle, which I wouldn't say we deserved, but at the same time we looked good. We looked the best we had looked all season, and that's not because we had looked crap all season. That's because we played some really, really good football, and that was with the back four of Semedo, who's been out for the first 3 games through suspension. So Semedo, Mosquera, Dawson, and Ait-Nouri. I don't think you can get much better in terms of for the level that we're at. But it's just it's not been working. O'Neill's not been able to find that balance between the sort of defensive structure, playing the likes of Totti at left back at times, and Ait-Nouri being very attacking and potentially not as defensive. So I think that's been a big part of it. But aside from that, it is difficult to put your finger on, why we've started quite as slowly as we have. Although Opta reported that statistically we do have the most difficult start to the season in terms of fixtures than any other team in the league. So, I suppose a sort of slow start was bound to happen in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some really interesting points to take from that. I think looking back at that Newcastle game, obviously you suffered a 2-1 defeat, and the nature of that defeat, controlling large parts of the game, going 1-0 up, and then ultimately goals from Fabian Schär and Harvey Barnes kind of stole the 3 points off you, it felt. So is there maybe an issue with the mentality of this Wolves side that Villa could look to exploit, something to do with kind of going through large spells of the game in control and then switching off for goals at the end?
No, I don't particularly think the mentality is an issue. In fact, I think, if anything, that's our strong point. You look at players like Cunha, João Gomez, Lamina, and I think the vast majority of fans feel really sorry for those kind of players, Dawson being another one, who you can see give and commit 110% both physically and mentally, and to be honest, they deserve better than losing. I think if you take that game in isolation, it was won by the substitutions. I mean, Barnes came on and was up against Doherty, who came on for us. Semedo went off with cramp, and he brushed past Doherty for their second goal. Was almost made too easy for him, to be honest. And Andre, our new signing, he had to come off due to injury as well. And when he was on was when we were controlling the game. I don't know if you saw, but he made something like 40 completed passes, and didn't misplace a single pass during the time he was on. So, that sort of gap in quality between our our substitutes and our starters was, that's bound to make a difference. So I think we were just unlucky, to be honest with you. I don't think it's anything that, if I was a Villa fan and I knew that, I wouldn't be sort of pointing it out as something to get excited over.
Okay, and kind of looking at Gary O'Neill, zooming in on him a little bit, he's seemingly come under some criticism in recent weeks from sections of the Wolves fan base. What are your personal thoughts on that? Do you think that's fair criticism, or do you think it's slightly harsh?
I think it's harsh, but it depends on, there's a few different points that people have been speaking about. I think some of it's fair, but a lot of it's harsh. The one thing that people have been looking at is when you take into consideration our results from the end of last season, we've got something like 6 points out of a possible 42, I think, which, that's really not good. But people are basing their opinions off this. When, you're looking at the end of last season, the amount of injuries we had, and we had such a small squad as well. I know we lost to Villa away. We had a 17-year-old playing up front. I think Aït-Nouri was playing left wing instead of left back, and there's times where Lamina played on the wing and up front first when he's a holding midfielder. So I'd wash my hands with those results at least. But in terms of the squad selection and the personnel, I mean, for the first few games, Dawson didn't play at all, and I think that was sort of unforgivable in a way, just because of he's very, very good, and he's made a massive impact and massive difference to our defence since coming back. So I can understand people criticising him for that, but apart from that specific sort of decision, I think, I think a lot of it's very just reactionary as opposed to logical, to be honest with you.
Okay, and we saw a huge departure from the Wolves squad from last season, with obviously Pedro Neto leaving to move to Chelsea. How has that affected both the squad in terms of how they play? Does it affect you in your kind of going forward, your output going forward? Is he as big a loss as it looks from the outside?
The short answer is no. I think, we played a lot of games without him last season, and throughout his whole time at the club, he was injured a lot. And don't get me wrong, once he got back and got up to speed, he was our best player. There is no dispute in that, especially going forwards at least. But I mean, you look at our top goal scorers last season, we had more than, I think, there's 2 players with 10 or more goals in the league, in Cunha and Hwang Hee-chan, and we've still got those players, and we still have quality going forwards. I think if anything from our start to the season is we've looked very good going forwards, but we've just been unable to defend, and we're seemingly sort of managing, or at least trying to close that gap at least. And I just hope that balance can work out sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Well, that's a little insight, Villa fans, into Wolves season so far, and we're going to be back after a short message courtesy of Zencastr to talk all about Saturday's game. Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Global Sports Podcast Network. Zencastr makes it easy to start a high-quality podcast built for growth from day one. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns, Zencastr makes it easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. So, Will, with all those kind of thoughts from Wolves' start to the season in mind, how do you expect this Wolves side to line up both personnel and style-wise on Saturday?
I'm hoping it to be a standard 4-3-3 with the defence lining up the same as how I mentioned it earlier. we started against Newcastle with 3 centre midfielders on the pitch, but actually a 4-4-2 lineup, and it was obvious that that wasn't working. That's another criticism of O'Neill I think people can pick up on over the last weekend. It was never going to work. I don't understand the thinking behind it. But then we changed and Lamina came back into central midfield, and we looked a lot more solid and, as you mentioned, started to control the game. So I think we'll go unchanged. I could perhaps see Sarabia coming in to start ahead of Bellegarde on the right-hand side of the front three. And like I said, we've got that midfield is very, very rigid and sort of robust. But we've got a lot of quality going forwards, a lot of skillful players, and I'm hoping obviously that they can make the difference for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for sort of Villa fans who maybe haven't seen the Newcastle game, what is that Wolves 11? Can you talk us through that kind of that 11-man team?
We've had Sam Johnson, a recent signing, come in and start in goal. That in itself, that could be a podcast on its own. That one, it's just come out of nowhere, but he's looked good.
A player we know very well here at Villa.
Yes, this is it. Our goal our goal that made us lose against Newcastle was scored by an ex-Albion player and conceded by an ex-Albion player. So but anyway, he's in goal, and then from the right to the left in the back forwards, as I mentioned earlier, Semedo, Mosquera, Dawson, Ait Nouri, 3 midfield of Lamina, our captain, who's so underrated, by the way. He's just unreal. In terms of probably does the dirty work that a lot of fans and neutral spectators don't pay attention to. But if you know football and play it, you'll realise it. It's him, Andre and João Gomez, and all 3 of them are very, very similar. But I think that works in a way with the amount of goals we were conceding. I think if we can be physical and aggressive and take control of the midfield that way, I think that will strengthen us defensively. And then Strander Larsen, a new signing, who, to use a classic football phrase, got good feet for a big man. He moves nicely. He did very well for our goal against Newcastle on the weekend, and he looks promising. He looks a proper sort of number 9, and then probably Sarabia, maybe Hwang, maybe Bellegarde on either side of him, and Cunha will be the other one who, he's just unreal. He's so good. But those are the only sort of players that I would imagine would have a chance of, the likes of Cunha, and I don't know who else would have a chance of getting in your current team. But the quality that they do possess does really, obviously it helps us, and it I'm hoping it causes you guys problems at the weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one for Villa, I think, after obviously our Champions League triumph on Tuesday, as to what team Emery decides to go for. I think it was a surprise that he didn't make as many personnel changes to that Champions League team as we maybe expected off the back of the Everton game. But I think if we're playing off the team that we expect him to go for, it's going to be Martinez with Cash, Konza, Torres, and then Luka Dean, with a kind of double pivot in the midfield of Onana and Tielemans. And then this is where it can get a little bit difficult. Ramsey played really well on Tuesday night, but yeah, so I expect that kind of that 3 sort of behind Watkins is going to be a little bit tougher to predict. Against Everton, he went for McGinn, Rodgers and Ramsey, which is seemingly the kind of 3 that he favours. I think what you mentioned about the midfield battle is going to be really important. You've got quite a combative midfield with Gomez, Andre and Lamina in there as well. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So I think that midfield battle is going to be very important, with players like Lamina stopping McGinn, getting on the ball in those central areas where he is so dangerous, stopping Tielemans playing those kind of through balls up to Watkins. How important do you think that midfield battle is going to be?
Oh, crucial. That midfield 3 that I mentioned, we've only seen played together so far against Newcastle, and even then it wasn't for a full 90 with Andre going off, and as I mentioned, we didn't originally start with the 4-3-3, but when they played together in that midfield, it was unreal in terms of just how good and how, the way I see it, obviously you've got different types of midfield players, but at our level, that sort of mid-table Premier League standard, you're going to do well to find, the sort of the players that can consistently win midfield battles by pure luxury and skill and passing and moving the ball quick and decision making. And I find that the just aggression and sort of not even necessarily more defensive approach, because it's winning the ball to progress and then win it and give it and get forward. We know Newcastle over the past few seasons have had their little midfield duo of Guimaraes and Joe Linton, sort of known for the same characteristics that I just mentioned, and our midfield ran rings around theirs, absolutely battered them in the middle, and I'll be interested to see if your guys at Villa can stop that, because when it got going and was in full flow, it was very, very good. I think, or at least I hope, that they'll be able to stop the likes of Onana and Tielemans from playing pretty sort of through balls. And I know those are both sort of relatively physical players, but Onana, for example, you could trade him for Joe Linton, which I mentioned, and you've got Andre, who's sort of a foot smaller and 10 kilos lighter than him, bullying him around the park. So I'm hoping they can have the same effect against you.
Absolutely. And a question I think Villa fans will be wondering is, how good are you at defending set pieces? Because that's an area that we've sort of had a lot of success in, not only with the obvious 6'5" Onana winning everything in the air seemingly, but Austin McPhee, the set piece coach, being so creative with the kind of the plays that we've seen. Is that something that we can look to exploit against Wolves?
I just think, stick Big Dawson on Onana, and then what have you got up your pocket, Mr. McPhee? I think, obviously there's other players as well. Mosquera, I think I've probably not spoken enough about him, and I always like to whenever we do a crossover episode, because he's a player that if you don't support Wolves, you probably won't have heard of, but he's great. He's Colombian. He's got that sort of South American trait of just aggression and physicality and just a bit of bite and attitude that I think is missing from a lot of players these days. So I'm hoping that those two, the big centre halves that they're supposed to be, and Strand Larsen getting back in defence. In terms of physicality, I can't see it being an issue. But in terms of alertness and awareness, we've been caught, I've spoken about before, with a few sort of quick set pieces at the start of the season. And that really worried me at the start, to be honest. Just in general, let alone set pieces, was our sort of... I mean, you asked me earlier about mentality. I say, if you asked me that then I would have raised the issues of alertness and awareness, and sort of reacting quickly to things. But I'd like to think that we'd be sort of self-sufficient in that respect. The one question that I've got for you, because obviously it's not that long ago since Wolves were playing European football. You've got a midweek game, a Sunday game, every other week. How do you guys at Villa see that affecting you? Because I know that we dealt with it relatively well when we had it, considering our squad size being so small. I was just wondering if, you mentioned about the sort of surprising lack of rotation from Everton to your Champions League fixture. I was just wondering how do you think that will affect you guys going into this fixture?
I think it's a really interesting one. As you mentioned, there wasn't as much rotation as I think a lot of fans thought there would be for the young boys game. We expected, for example, just one position. We expected Ian Matson to step in for Luca Dean, to kind of see exactly what he's going to bring to the table. He's a player that we haven't seen a lot of minutes of, and he obviously arrived with a big price tag. But I think there's a trust in Emery. He's somebody who's played consistent European competition, I think, for over a decade now. So he's a man who knows how to balance domestic football and obviously continental football as well. I think in the Conference League last year, obviously completely different standard from the Conference League to the Champions League, although with our result on Tuesday, it didn't seem that way. I think there's a sense of kind of working out exactly how we're going to balance Champions League football, because last year on the surface is the Conference League games that we played, we performed very well in up until obviously the kind of the semi-final, and I think our quality took us through that competition up until that point, and still managing to achieve fourth in the Premier League was a great achievement. Is that something we can repeat this year with Champions League football? It's going to be a really, really tough ask. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Emery prioritises this game. I think he'll know the importance of it to supporters, obviously being a local derby. But it will be interesting to see with some of the players who maybe aren't getting that time on the pitch, knocking on his door, trying to kind of start this game. The obvious one being John Duran, who has had a really great start to the season off the bench. And just before we get into John Duran, we're gonna cover him in part 3, but just before that, we're going to have a quick message from the Global Sports Podcast Network. This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day. Will, we spoke a little bit there. We mentioned the name John Duran, and that leads on to a kind of another question. Are there any particular players in this Villa squad that yourself and Wolves fans will be fearing come Saturday?
I wouldn't, not particularly, and that's not, in a sort of disrespectful way. They're just, you're a very well-rounded side, I think. I mean, Duran obviously looks good, looks exciting. And, I think give him half a yard, you're in trouble if he gets a shot off. But that's the same with most strikers at this level of football. So, as I say, not really. I just think, but as a whole, but again, there's no such thing as an easy game, at this level. I mean, you mentioned before about your fixtures in, the Champions League. I was wondering to myself if that was something we could look to exploit, the fact that you were balancing that with the domestic league. And I thought to myself, well, not really, not at this stage anyway. I mean, no disrespect to young boys, but you'd expect to go away and beat them, so it's not like you're playing the likes of Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, or whoever. So it's not like we can take advantage of that. I don't think there are any specific standouts. My only worry is actually from a Wolves point of view. I'll ask you first before I go into it, but it's the same question back to you. Are there any players who stand out from us?
Yeah, I think there's a few areas of the pitch that I think, obviously we spoke about the midfield battle being really important. I think you have a very good balance of both sort of robust defence first minded midfielders, but they also pose an attacking threat. We saw that against Newcastle with a really well worked goal with João Gomez kind of stepping over the ball, allowing it to roll through for Lamina. So I think you have a really good balance in that midfield. Obviously Cunha is always somebody that's going to kind of cause cause problems, especially down probably what would be defined as the defensively weaker side for Villa. If he plays off the left, he'll be running at Matty Cash, who is obviously a fantastic player.
Yeah, well, you say that. I thought that earlier when you mentioned Cash. It just struck me that he's a Premier League and Champions League starter.
Yeah, he is. It's a really tough one because obviously in the last few games he hasn't actually played because we've had Bogard.
I'll play with 10 men.
But this is it with Cash's injury. We're not sure the severity, whether he'll be back for that game at this stage. It's kind of been something that we're not quite sure about. We've seen Bogard step in, the young lad from the academy, and he's performed relatively well in the games that he's played. He started the Leicester game, played the Everton game, and then the Champions League as well. So he's adjusting to Premier League football as well, which is going to be incredibly kind of exciting to see what the future holds for him. But I think we've seen him struggle a little bit to deal with quicker kind of wingers. He had a bit of an issue with Dwight McNeil, which was obviously between him and Cunha. In my mind, there's obviously I would back Cunha a lot more than McNeil. So I think that's something Emery will look to try and drill into Bogard, that he will have a difficult time with Cunha, and I think I'd like to think there will be a game plan set up to try and nullify him, especially if he plays off the left.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if he plays off the left, I'm hoping Cash is back, because with all respect, there's only one winner of that. But apart from that, my worry from a Wolves point of view is us just not taking our chances or not creating enough. I'm hoping, again, if you'd asked me this earlier in the season, my worry would have been the defence just giving away goals for fun. Quite a few of our games at the start of the season appeared to be just games between teams who didn't know how to defend or just didn't want to, and we just ended up coming off worse. But yeah, my worry now, which we saw against Newcastle, was us not taking our chances and that costing us, because we know that Villa, great side, European football quality all the way through, whether you play Duran or Watkins. I mean, Watkins gave him like the happiest moment of my life during the summer, in the Euros, and that's because of the quality he possesses, and you've got quality throughout. You wouldn't be at this level if that wasn't the case. So I just worry that if, when we get our chances, we don't make the most of it, it will come back to bite us. I think that's inevitable. Although yourself included, and pretty much any Villa fan who I know or who I'm friends with, they always seem to say that Wolves are a bit of a bogey team for you guys, and you never couldn't quite scrape a result against us. Obviously, if you don't look at last season when we were just battered by injuries, was your last win against us back in the Championship when
I think so. 4-1.
Yeah.
I think that's the last time, unless there was. I don't think there was one in the Premier League before.
No.
But yeah, like you say, Wolves have been a bit of a difficult team for us to play, for whatever reason that is. I remember, obviously, a player that we now have at Villa, Dendoncker, scoring against us in a miserable day for us. But yeah, I think it's a weird one with Wolves, because we seem to match them for quality on paper a lot of the time, but we can just never seem to get a result up until last year. But we're hoping, as Emery has done so many times during his stint at Villa, he's kind of turning the tides and creating a history for us in that respect. So I think hopefully we'll be a little bit better off having Emery in charge.
I mean, that's certainly the impression I get as a neutral. Well, not even a neutral. But that's certainly the impression I get, is it feels like... I always remember, obviously, growing up supporting Wolves. We're in League One or the Championship, double relegations. Whenever we'd go ahead in a game, you always had that feeling of like, oh, this isn't going to last, or you're always worried. I remember when Nuno came in and we had a good spell under him, a good season and a good couple of seasons, then the whole feeling just completely changed. You'd go 1-0 up, or you'd be 1-0 up with 10 minutes to go, and I was just completely relaxed, like I knew that we were going to get a result. And I imagine that to be the same, or at least similar to how you guys now feel under Emery. He seems to carry himself in that way. And, you got a lot of your results, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your results last season to finish fourth were, I don't want to say lucky, but they were close, and they were, they were ones that, you have to work really hard for, or maybe it does come down to a bit of luck, but whatever it is, the result went your way. And I imagine that to be the feeling that you guys have.
A little bit. I think it was very... there were times last season where it was inconsistency that I think was our biggest downfall. We had amazing performances against the likes of Man City where we absolutely battered them off for 90 minutes like no team in Europe has done before or since under Guardiola. And then we, in the same week, beating Arsenal.
Sorry, can I just correct you?
Go on.
We did the double over City a few years ago.
Yeah.
2-0 away.
Yeah.
Just had them on strings.
Well, this is it. That's something we obviously share because we battered them for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it could have been a lot more than the 1-0 that we went away with. But then also, on the flip side of having a great week of kind of beating big media six sides there, we lose to Tottenham 4-0 at home. And it's those inconsistencies that I think...
Tottenham are a good team.
They're a great side, but they were a side that we were contending with for that fourth spot. And when you're going into, you're playing sides that are in and around you, big 6-point games at home, you don't want to be losing them 4-0, giving them the confidence.
And do you worry that because of, you mentioned it being something of a local derby, do you worry that, that I suppose from the players' point of view is the playing the occasion and that working against them? Do you worry that could be something that we see?
I think that yes and no. I think we have a good balance in the squad of players who will know what this game means to supporters. I think you look at the likes of Ramsey, obviously being a local boy from Birmingham, knows the importance of this. Morgan Rogers as well. Both local lads, both know what that rivalry means. But then on the flip side of that almost, I think we benefit from having a manager in Unai Emery who will see this as another game of football to go and win. He won't get caught up in the emotion of a local derby. He's a tactical genius and a football obsessive, and somebody who will take every marginal gain from watching hours of Wolves footage to formulate a plan of how to beat you, I think.
I think, you speaking about Emery in that way actually reminds me of O'Neill. I'm not saying they're anywhere near the same
tactical genius, Gary O'Neill.
I'm not saying they're anywhere near the same sort of quality, but in terms of their style, their management style, I think there's some extreme sort of similarities. Everything I'm sort of against in a football manager in a way, in terms of very, very stat orientated and focused, and you talk about those fine margins and weird little things that you just don't even think of as a fan. These people spend hours and hours and hours and hours looking into. I think it'll be interesting to see how those two sort of face off against one another. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of end the episode, what I'm looking for is I want a score prediction. And I also want something really sort of mystic from you, really specific, something that the average fan wouldn't call that could happen. It could be a particular player or a particular moment or a particular type of goal.
Yeah.
Give me something really mystic from you, Will.
A score prediction, I'll go with 1-1, purely because everything in my brain says that we shouldn't get a result, but all of my Villa friends say that we will, or we always seem to. Something mystic. I'll give you two. I'll give you an obvious one, which isn't really mystic at all, which is João Gomes is going to get a yellow.
Yeah,
that's just bound to happen. And the other one is Mosquera's scoring our goal.
Okay.
From a corner.
Yeah.
Big Yerson.
Yeah.
He's getting his head on the end of something.
Yeah.
And he's taking people with him whilst he does it. Probably not going to happen, but I've given it you now.
It's a lovely idea.
I assume you're going to give me something mystic also.
I am. I'm going to opt for a 2-1 Villa win. I think it will be a close game, but I like to think it's a game that possession-wise we can control. My mystic prediction is finally Morgan Rogers to get to reap the rewards of his ability to drive through teams. So I'm thinking a really nice solo goal where he sort of takes it past 2 or 3 and then slots it.
See, I think this is where João Gomez's yellow card comes in. I think to stop that from happening.
That could very well be the case, but I'm hoping finally we get a Morgan Rogers goal, because I think it's something he's definitely deserved to start this season and has been a little bit unlucky to not get that as of yet. So on that note, I will thank Will for joining me for this episode of the Daily Villa podcast. Be sure to find all the socials in the podcast description. This has been a Global Sports Podcast Network production. Thank you for listening, and up the Villa.
Wolves AWE.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.